Amara, a gentle and quiet teacher from Makurdi, had been married to Jabari for 5 years. Jabari was a rich and well-known car dealer from Kisumu. On social media, their life looked perfect. Smiling photos, matching clothes, sweet captions, and fancy anniversary dinners. People called them couple goals, but behind all the pictures was a painful truth. Jabari had a dangerous temper. He would shout, break things, and sometimes even throw hurtful words like knives. Amara always stayed silent, hiding the pain with a smile. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they had a small disagreement about a guest arriving late. It didn't seem like a big deal, but that night, in their bedroom, Jabari lost control. He punched Amara in the face, so hard she fell back. His mother and cousins were downstairs, laughing and drinking, not knowing what was happening. Or maybe they did, but no one came. Amara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood up, walked to the mirror, looked at her bleeding face and wiped it clean. That was the moment something inside her broke. Not her spirit, but the silence. That night, Amara decided she was done hiding. Amara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even raise her voice. After Jabari punched her, she stood there quietly, her cheeks stinging, her lips shaking, but not from fear, from something else. Maybe it was the pain, maybe it was shock, or maybe it was the feeling of being done. Done with pretending, done with staying quiet. She slowly walked to the mirror. Blood had trickled down the side of her face. Her eye was already starting to swell. She picked up a soft cloth, wet it, and calmly wiped the blood away. Her hands moved gently, as if she was used to cleaning up after her pain. She didn't even look angry, just tired, deeply, quietly tired. That night, she didn't sleep in the bed she shared with Jabari. She didn't want to be near him. She picked up a small pillow, lay it on the cold floor beside the window, and curled up like a child. The night was quiet, but her mind was not. She stared at the ceiling, the moonlight falling across her bruised face. Every second felt heavy, like her chest couldn't breathe right, but she stayed calm and wide awake. At exactly 3 a.m., something inside her shifted. She sat up. Her body was sore, but her mind was sharp. She quietly stood, walked to the small desk in the corner of the room, and turned on the lamp. The soft yellow light filled the space and for the first time in a long while, Amara wasn't afraid of being seen. She took out a pen and 3 sheets of paper. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. She was steady, focused, and sure. The first letter was to her lawyer. She wrote clearly, describing everything, not just what happened that night, but what had been happening for the past 2 years. The shouting, the threats, the insults, the bruises hidden under long sleeves and thick foundation. She wrote dates, details, and moments that had haunted her in silence. The second letter was to the police chief in her district. She had met him once at a school event where she was honoured for being an outstanding teacher. He had told her to reach out if she ever needed anything. Tonight, she did. She wrote to him, not as a teacher, not as a woman, but as a human being asking for help, for protection, for justice. The third letter was the hardest. It was for Jabari's father, the man who always praised his son like he was the perfect man, the perfect husband. He would say things like, "My son is a real man, strong, proud, responsible." Amara had smiled politely every time, but tonight she didn't smile. In the letter, she wrote the truth. She wrote, "Your son is not a real man. He is a coward who hits women when no one is watching. He is not strong. He is dangerous." She didn't write with hate. She wrote with truth, and that made the words even louder. After finishing all 3 letters, Amara placed them in envelopes and wrote the names clearly on each one. She didn't know what the next day would bring. She didn't know if people would believe her, but she knew one thing for sure. Her silence had ended. Her pain would not stay locked behind makeup and smiles anymore. She was done hiding, done covering bruises with foundation and lies, done defending the man who hurt her. She leaned back in her chair, her body aching, her face sore, but there was something new in her chest, a small, quiet flame, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. Not because someone would save her, but because she had finally chosen to save herself. She looked out the window. The sky was still dark, but there was a hint of blue on the edge, the kind that comes right before sunrise. It reminded her of something her mother used to say, "Even the longest night ends with light." And now, after years of darkness, Amara had taken her first step toward that light. She folded a blanket around her and lay back down on the floor. She didn't cry herself to sleep like before. In fact, she didn't cry at all. There was no more need. She had already cried enough in the past. Now her tears had turned into words, and her words, written in ink, would soon become her shield. Her voice, once so quiet, had now found its way onto paper, and it was powerful. As she closed her eyes, one thought repeated in her head like a quiet song. I am not weak. I am not small. I am not invisible. The world would soon know the truth, and she would no longer hide behind silence. The next day, the sun shone brightly over the large estate in Kilifi. It was supposed to be a special day, Jabari and Amara's 5th wedding anniversary celebration. The garden was decorated like a movie scene. White tents covered rows of gold-trimmed tables, flowers hung from every corner, and champagne glasses sparkled in the light. Waiters walked around in black suits, offering snacks and pouring drinks. Expensive perfumes filled the air. Everyone looked their best, smiling, laughing, taking selfies. Cameras were flashing, and guests kept saying how beautiful everything was. "What a perfect couple," someone said. "They are truly blessed," said another. No one could see the truth behind the beauty. Jabari walked around greeting guests with his usual charm, hugging uncles, joking with cousins, and proudly introducing Amara to everyone like a trophy. But Amara was quiet. She wore a long, simple dress, nothing too fancy, and large sunglasses that covered almost half her face. People noticed, but no one dared to ask. Some whispered. Others assumed she was just being stylish. She smiled politely, but stayed mostly silent, sitting next to Jabari, but clearly in her own world. Then came the toast. A tall cousin stood up, raised his glass, and shouted, "To the perfect couple!" Everyone cheered. Glasses clinked. Phones went up to record. Jabari grinned wide and nodded proudly, but Amara didn't raise her glass. Instead, she slowly stood up. All eyes turned to her. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, calm, still. Then, before anyone could speak or ask, she reached up and took off her sunglasses. The moment her shades were gone, the garden fell silent. Her face, half of it, was covered in a dark purple bruise, swollen, raw, ugly, but she stood tall. The guests gasped, some mouths opened in shock. Others looked away. A few even dropped their glasses. Jabari froze. For the first time, he didn't smile. He didn't move. He didn't expect this. Amara looked around at the faces staring back at her. Friends, family, neighbors, people who had called her strong, lucky, beautiful, people who had seen her at events, in pictures, at church, people who had chosen not to ask when her smiles didn't reach her eyes. She looked at them with a calm, quiet fire in her eyes. She took a deep breath and said, "This is what your beloved son gave me as an anniversary gift." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It cut through the silence like a knife. Then she pulled out a small folder from her handbag and began placing photos on each table. Photos of herself with older bruises, cuts, black eyes, swollen lips, all taken at different times, different places. But the story was the same. Pain. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The pictures screamed for her. The bruises cried enough. She looked at everyone and said, "For years, I smiled for the camera. I covered my face in makeup. I laughed at parties. I sat quietly while you all praised him. You told me men get angry. You told me to be patient. You told me to protect our family name. But today, I choose to protect myself." People sat frozen. No one clapped. No one toasted. Even the champagne bubbles seemed to stop dancing. Jabari tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. His hands clenched into fists, but he couldn't move. He had never seen this version of Amara. No one had. Then Amara reached into her bag one more time and pulled out an envelope. She turned to Jabari's mother, walked over and placed it in her hand. "These are divorce papers," she said softly. "You raised him. You protected him. You can keep him." The old woman didn't respond. Her hands shook as she took the papers. Amara turned to Jabari, looked him straight in the eye and said, "You broke my body, but not my voice." Then she smiled, not a smile of joy, but one of freedom, of power, of peace. Someone in the crowd had been live streaming the whole moment. Within hours, the clip was all over social media. People watched it in Nairobi, in Lagos, in Accra, in Cape Town. It spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. "She's a hero. This is bravery. No more silence." By the next morning, it had millions of views. But in that garden, in that single moment, none of that had happened yet. There was just Amara, standing tall, standing proud, no longer hidden, no longer afraid. The bruise on her face told a story, but the fire in her eyes told the ending. She wasn't a victim, she was a survivor, and the world was finally listening. She didn't scream, she didn't shout, she didn't throw anything or make a scene. Amara simply walked to the front of the crowd and picked up the microphone. Her hands were steady, her voice was clear. Her face, still marked with a dark purple bruise, showed no fear, only truth, only power. She looked around at the people sitting at the tables, family members, friends, co-workers, neighbours, all dressed nicely, all holding champagne glasses, all pretending nothing was wrong. Then she said, in a calm and steady voice, "This is what your beloved son gave me as an anniversary gift." The entire place went silent again. The sound of the wind in the trees, the soft clink of a spoon falling on a plate, even a child whispering. Everything stopped. Everyone was watching her. No one could believe what they were seeing or hearing. Amara reached into her handbag once more and pulled out a small bundle. Carefully, she walked to the first table and placed a photo on it, then the second, then the third. One by one, she dropped photos onto each table like cards. But these were not cards. These were pictures of her face with black eyes, swollen lips, red bruises on her arms, scratches on her neck, and wounds on her back. They were taken over the last 2 years. Some were recent, some were older, but all were real, all were raw. Gasps filled the air. A woman at the back covered her mouth. An older man lowered his head in shame. A cousin looked away, pretending not to see. And Jabari sat frozen in his chair. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes wide. He couldn't move. He had never seen this side of Amara. He had always thought she was quiet, soft, easy to control. But now, standing in front of everyone, Amara looked like a different woman. Strong, calm, brave, free. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just spoke, and her words cut deeper than any scream ever could. "You all knew," she said. Her voice was still soft, but the power behind it shook everyone. "You saw the signs. You heard the arguments. You saw the makeup I wore to cover the bruises. You watched me wear sunglasses indoors. You saw me flinch when he raised his hand. And you said nothing." She took a deep breath and kept going. "You all said, men get angry. You said, be patient. You said, protect your home. You told me to pray harder. You told me to stay quiet. You told me not to shame the family." She looked around again, locking eyes with people who had once smiled in her face and ignored her pain. "But today," she said slowly, "you will listen." Her voice was no longer just her own. It was the voice of every woman who had ever been told to stay silent, the voice of every wife who had covered her bruises, the voice of every daughter who was told to endure. Amara was speaking for all of them now. Her words filled the air, louder than any music, clearer than any toast. She looked at Jabari. "You thought I'd stay silent forever. You thought I would keep covering for you, keep smiling, keep protecting your name while losing myself. But today, I choose me." People started whispering. Some started crying. Some started clapping softly. But Amara wasn't done. She stepped closer to Jabari and said, "You don't get to tell my story anymore. I do. Jabari tried to speak, but no words came out. His hands shook, his lips moved, but no sound followed. The man who had controlled everything for years now sat speechless in front of everyone. No power, no defense, just silence. Amara turned back to the crowd. For years, I suffered in silence to protect this image, this lie of a perfect marriage. I smiled for your cameras. I dressed up for your events. I played my role, but I was dying inside. She paused and added, not anymore. There was a heaviness in the air, but also a shift, a feeling that something big was happening, something important. People were no longer just watching. They were feeling. They were understanding. They were seeing the truth for the first time. Then Amara ended with one sentence that made everyone stop breathing for a second. If you ever loved me, don't tell me you're sorry. Don't defend him. Don't say you didn't know. Just promise me you'll never let another woman suffer in silence again. And with that, she handed the mic back, walked to her seat, and sat down, head high, eyes forward. She had said what needed to be said, and now the world couldn't unhear it. Amara stood there in front of everyone, calm and strong. She didn't rush. She didn't let anger lead her. She simply walked across the grass with quiet power, holding a white envelope in her hand. The guests watched in silence, not daring to move or speak. She stopped in front of Jabari's mother, a woman who had always smiled in her face, praised her cooking, and called her daughter, even while turning a blind eye to her son's rage. Amara looked her in the eye, held out the envelope, and said, "Here are the divorce papers." Her voice was soft but steady, each word clear and sharp. Then she added, "You raised him. You protect him. You can keep him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people looked at the floor. Some stared in shock. Jabari's mother didn't say anything. She took the envelope slowly, her hand trembling. It was like the truth had finally arrived at her doorstep, not hidden, not whispered, but handed to her in broad daylight. Then Amara turned to Jabari, who was still frozen in place, his confidence shattered. She looked at him with a calm face and gave him a small, peaceful smile. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but out of freedom. She said, "You broke my body, but not my voice." And just like that, she ended years of silence with one powerful sentence. That moment, that exact moment, was being live-streamed by one of the guests. It wasn't planned. Someone just pulled out their phone and started recording when they realized something big was happening. And that clip, only a few minutes long, traveled faster than anyone could imagine. It reached WhatsApp groups, Facebook timelines, Twitter feeds, and Instagram reels across Africa within hours. People watched it in taxis, offices, schools, and homes. Women cried. Men sat quiet. Teenagers shared it again and again. Some even watched it with their mothers and grandmothers, discussing abuse openly for the first time in years. In 3 days, the video hit 22 million views. News platforms picked it up. Talk shows invited her. Radio stations replayed her voice. But more than that, people began to see her not just as a victim, but as a fighter, a teacher who had found her strength in the middle of pain, a woman who had walked through fire and come out shining. Brands started calling. They wanted her to speak at women's events. Some wanted her to appear in ads. Others wanted to feature her story in magazines. Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who stood up in front of a crowd and chose truth over shame. But Amara didn't care about fame. She didn't want to be a celebrity. She only wanted to help other women find their voices too. She replied to some of the calls, choosing carefully who to work with. She said no to anyone who just wanted attention, but she said yes to those who wanted change. She told her story on live TV. She sat in front of young girls and told them what love should never look like. She stood on stages and said, "I thought I had to protect him, but I should have been protecting me." People listened. People learned. Some women left abusive homes after watching her story. Some families sat down and talked about real love, about anger, about silence. Schools started calling her to speak to teenagers. Even churches asked her to lead women's seminars. Amara wasn't just a woman with a past anymore. She was a voice, a symbol, a light. Jabari, on the other hand, lost everything he thought he controlled. His friends backed away. His business partners dropped him. His face disappeared from the posters in town. No one wanted to be seen working with a man who beat his wife while calling it anger. No one trusted him anymore. And this time, no one could cover it up. The truth was out, and it wasn't going away. Amara, however, was rising, slowly, peacefully, with grace and strength. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to fight dirty. She only wanted healing, for herself, for other women, for a world where people pretend too much and speak too little. And it all started with one moment. One woman, one bruise, one microphone, one truth. She had once been quiet, once afraid, once broken. But now she was whole, she was heard, and most of all, she was free. Months passed, and Amara's life had completely changed. She was no longer just the quiet teacher from Makurdi. She was now a voice for millions. She wrote a book, a powerful memoir called The Gift Wrapped in Bruises. In it, she shared her story, the pain, the silence, the fear, and the moment she finally chose herself. People connected with her words. The book spread like wildfire. It became a bestseller across Africa. Women said it made them feel seen. Men said it made them think. Everyone was talking about Amara, but she didn't stop there. Amara took the pain she once hid and turned it into purpose. She started an organization called Amara's Voice. It began as a small support group for women who had suffered abuse, but it grew fast. Today, it runs programs in 4 countries, helping women find shelter, legal support, and most importantly, their voice. Women now stand on stages, hold hands, and say, "I am not alone," because Amara opened that door. And Jabari, he lost everything. His business partners pulled away. Clients stopped coming. His name became a warning, not a brand. No one wanted to deal with a man who hurt a woman dressed for love. Her silence once protected him, but her voice, it built a legacy.